Chapter 6. Jack Pumpkinhead's Ride to the Emerald City. At daybreak, Tip was awakened by the Pumpkinhead. That's what we're calling him? He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, bathed in a little brook, and then ate a portion of his bread and cheese. Having thus prepared for a new day, the boy said, "Let us start at once. 9 miles is quite a distance, but we ought to reach the Emerald City by noon, if no accidents happen." It can't be that much a distance if you're there by noon. I mean, Dorothy had to walk all over the world, so toughen up, buddy. So, the Pumpkinhead was again perched upon the back of the sawhorse, and the journey was resumed. Tip noticed that the purple tint of the grass and trees had now faded to a dull lavender, and before long this lavender appeared to take on a greenish tinge that gradually brightened as they drew nearer to the city where the Scarecrow ruled. Which, if you know anything about the Scarecrow, good heavens. I mean, I wish him the best, but that's gotta be worse than the lizard, right? The little party had traveled but 2 short miles upon their way when the road of yellow brick was parted by a broad and swift river. Tip was puzzled how to cross, but after a time he discovered a man in a ferry boat approaching from the other side of the stream. When the man reached the bank, Tip asked, "Will you row us to the other side?" Yes, if you have money," returned the ferryman, whose face looked cross and disagreeable. And I definitely gave him the wrong voice for being cross and disagreeable. "But I have no money," said Tip. "None at all?" inquired the man. "None at all," answered the boy. "Then I'll not break my back in rowing you over," said the ferryman decidingly. "What a nice man," remarked the Pumpkinhead smilingly. Oh, he missed that whole social cue. And by the end of this book, he's probably going to be ruling the country like everyone else. Tip was trying to think, for it was a great disappointment to him to find the journey so suddenly brought to an end. This has been the marvelous... No, just kidding. "I must certainly get to the Emerald City," he said to the boatman. But how can I cross the river if you cannot take me?" The man laughed, and it was not a nice laugh. "That wooden horse will float," said he, "and you can ride him across. As for the pumpkin-headed loon..." The pumpkin-headed loon! As for the pumpkin-headed loon who accompanies you, let him sink." What? "Let him sink or swim. It won't matter greatly which." Oh. "Don't worry about me," said Jack, smiling pleasantly upon the crabbed ferryman. "I am sure I ought to float beautifully." Tip thought the experiment was worth making, and the sawhorse, who did not know what danger meant, offered no objections whatever. So the boy let it down into the water and climbed upon its back. Jack also waded up to his knees and grasped the tail of the horse so that he might keep his pumpkin head above the water. "Now," said Tip, instructing the sawhorse, "if you wiggle your legs, you will probably swim. And if you swim, you shall probably reach the other side." "Thanks, Tip." The sawhorse at once began to wiggle its legs, which acted as oars and moved the adventurers slowly across the river to the opposite side. So successful was the trip that they presently were climbing, wet and dripping, up the grassy bank. Well, excellent. They're well on their way to find out what happens to this Scarecrow. But the sawhorse had floated so perfectly that from his knees up, the boy was entirely dry. As for the Pumpkinhead, every stitch of his gorgeous clothing was dripped water. "The sun will soon dry us out," said Tip, "and anyhow, we are safely across in spite of the ferryman. And We can continue our journey." "I didn't mind swimming at all," remarked the horse. "And nor did I," said Jack. They soon regained the road of yellow brick, which proved to be quite a continuation of the road they had left on the other side. And Tip once more mounted the Pumpkinhead upon the back of the sawhorse. "If you ride fast," he said, "the wind will help you to dry your clothing. I will hold on to the horse's tail and run after you. In this way we will become dry in a very short time." Soon he was out of breath, and though he wanted to call, "Whoa!" to the horse, he found he could not get the word out of his throat. "In this way you will become dry in a very short time." "Then the horse must step lively," said Jack. "I'll do my best," returned the sawhorse cheerfully. Tip grasped the end of a branch that served as the tail to the sawhorse and called loudly, "Get up!" The horse started at a good pace, and Tip followed behind. Then he decided they could go faster, so he shouted, "Trot!" Now the sawhorse remembered that this was the command to go as fast as he could. So he began rocking along the road at a tremendous pace, and Tip had hard work, running faster than he ever had before in his life. Soon he was out of breath, and although he wanted to call, "Whoa!" to the horse, he found he could not get a word out of his throat. Then the end of the tail he was clutching, being nothing more than a dead branch, suddenly broke away, and the next minute the boy was rolling in the dust of the road, while the horse and its pumpkin-headed rider dashed on and quickly disappeared into the distance. By the time Pip had picked himself up and cleared the dust of his throat so he could say, "Whoa!" There was no further need of saying it, for the horse was long since out of sight. So he did the only sensible thing he could do. He sat down and he took a good rest, and afterward he began walking along the road. "Sometime I will surely overtake them," he reflected, "for the road will end at the gates of the Emerald City, and they can't go further than that." Yeah, again, the stakes are so incredibly low. But we'll see. Let's see what happens. Meanwhile, Jack was holding fast to the post and saw the sawhorse was tearing along the road like a racer. Neither of them knew Tip was left behind, for the Pumpkinhead did not look around and the sawhorse couldn't. As he rode, Jack noticed that the grass and the trees had become a bright emerald green in color, so he guessed they were nearing the Emerald City even before the tall spires and domes came into sight. At length, a high wall of green stone studded with thick emeralds loomed up before them, and fearing the sawhorse would not know enough to stop and might smash them both against this wall, Jack ventured to cry, "Whoa!" as loud as he could. So suddenly did the horse obey, that had it not been for his post, Jack would have been pitched off head foremost, and his beautiful face ruined. That would have been an ending. "That was a fast ride, dear father," he exclaimed, and then, hearing no reply, he turned around and discovered for the first time that Tip was not there. This apparent desertion puzzled the Pumpkinhead and made him uneasy. And while he was wondering what had become of the boy and what he ought to do next under such trying circumstances, the gateway in the green wall opened and a man came out. The man was short and round and with a fat face that seemed reasonably good-natured. He was clothed all in green and wore a high, peaked green hat upon his head and green spectacles over his eyes. Bowing before the Pumpkinhead, he said, "I am the guardian of the gates of the Emerald City. May I inquire who you are and what is your business?" "My name is Jack Pumpkinhead," returned the other smilingly, but as to my business, I haven't the least idea what the world is." "What?" "I haven't the least idea in the world what it is." "Same, buddy." The guardian of the gate looked surprised and then shook his head as if dissatisfied with the reply. "What are you, a man or a pumpkin?" he asked politely. Can you say that? Something that rude politely? Hey, are you a pumpkin? Huh? Both, if you please. And is this wooden horse... Is it alive? Questioned the guardian. The horse rolled his one knotty eye upward and winked at Jack. Then it gave a prance and brought one leg down on the guardian's toes. I did not expect that coming, really. Okay. Well. Ouch! Cried the man. I'm sorry I asked that question, but the answer is most convincing. Have you any errand, sir, in the Emerald City? It seems to me that I have, replied the Pumpkinhead seriously, but I cannot think of what it is. My father knows all about it, but he is not here. This is a strange affair, very strange, declared the guardian. But you seem harmless. Folks do not smile so delightfully when they mean mischief. A statement that is demonstrably not true, but we'll let it slide. As for that, said Jack, I cannot help my smile, for it is carved on my face with a jackknife. Okay, you realize you're arguing against what he just said. Well, come with me into my room, resumed the guardian, and I will see what can be done for you. So Jack rode the sawhorse through the gateway into a little room built into a wall. The guardian pulled a bell cord, and presently a tall soldier clothed in green uniform entered from the opposite door. This soldier carried a long green gun over his shoulder and had lovely green whiskers that fell quite to his knees. A mustache that falls to his knees? The guardian at once addressed him, saying, Here's a strange gentleman who doesn't know why he's come to the Emerald City or what he wants. Tell me, what shall we do with him? The soldier with the green whiskers looked at Jack with very much care and curiosity. Finally, he shook his head so positively that little waves rippled down his whiskers, and then he said, I'm stopping to think if I've done this voice of the man with the green whiskers before and what it possibly could have been. But for now, basically he just says, that is His Majesty's business, returned the soldier. I have troubles of enough of my own. All outside troubles must be turned over to His Majesty. So he put the spectacle on. So put these spectacles on this fellow, and I'll take them to the royal palace. So the guardian opened a big box of spectacles and tried to fit a pair around Jack's great round eyes. I'm sorry. We're still wearing the spectacles. You'd think when the lizard left, you'd be like, get rid of him. It's a scam. It's a scam. I haven't had a pair in stock that will really cover up these eyes, said the little man with a sigh, and your head is so big I shall be obliged to tie the spectacles on. But why do I need to wear spectacles? Asked Jack. It's the fashion here, said the soldier. They will keep you from being blinded by the glitter and the glare and the gorgeous Emerald City. Okay, I'm developing it here. This is the ground floor of how voices are made. Terribly. Oh, exclaimed Jack. Tie them on by all means. I don't wish to be blinded. Nor I, broke in the sawhorse, so a pair of green spectacles was fashioned over his bulging knots that served for his eyes. Then the soldier with the green whiskers led them through the inner gate, and they once found themselves in the main street of the magnificent Emerald City. Sparkling green gems ornamented the fronts of beautiful houses, and the towers and turrets were all faced with emeralds. Even the green marble pavement glittered with the precious stones, and it was indeed a grand and marvelous sight to one who beheld it for the first time. I hear what you're saying. It looks nice, but here's where my mind is going. The Scarecrow has got all these riches, and his friend, poor old Dorothy, just got her house destroyed, and it's got nothing. Like, I don't know. However, the Pumpkinhead and the Sawhorse, knowing nothing of the wealth and beauty, paid little attention to the wonderful sights they saw through the green spectacles. They calmly followed the green soldier and scarcely noticed the crowds of green people who stared at them in surprise. When a green dog ran out and barked at them, the Sawhorse promptly kicked it. Goodness! Kicked it with his wooden leg and sent the little animal howling into one of the houses. But nothing more serious than that happened to interrupt their progress to the royal palace. Nothing more serious. How is that not a problem? The horse is a maniac. Oh. The Pumpkinhead wanted to ride up the green marble steps and straight onto the Scarecrow's presence, but the soldier would not permit that. Wait, they're not going to get tip? So Jack dismounted with much difficulty, and a servant led the Sawhorse around to the rear, while the soldier with the green whiskers escorted the Pumpkinhead into the palace by the front entrance. The stranger was left in a handsomely furnished... Why can't I speak today? The stranger was left in a handsomely furnished waiting room, while the soldier went to announce him. It so happened that at this hour His Majesty was at leisure and greatly bored for want of something to do. I'm just gonna let that soak in for a second. So he ordered his visitor to be shown at once into his throne room. Jack felt no fear or embarrassment meeting the ruler of this magnificent city, for he was entirely ignorant of all worldly customs. But when he entered the room and saw for the first time His Majesty the Scarecrow seated upon the glittering throne, he stopped short in amazement.